I sort of missed. You broke up a little, so I think you asked me to start. I hope that's true. My name is Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic. I'm here in Miami, Florida. I'm a member of the South Dixie Group, and I haven't found it necessary to have a drink since January 25th, 1981. So I'm in my 42nd year of sobriety, uh, enjoying God's grace. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my deal. And I'm 73 years old. I'm not gonna be able to fit 73 years or 41 years of sobriety into a 30-minute or 45-minute talk, whatever it is I'm doing here today. But I'll do the best I can. I don't have any canned talks or anything like that. I just do what the Lord puts on my heart. And I just want to tell you what a privilege it is to be here at this meeting, talking to some old friends and people I know, and hopefully new friends. And I just hope whatever I say, something I say, resonates with somebody and helps them get to a different level or move upward from the bucket of crabs. I might even explain a little bit about the bucket of crabs because I'll probably allude to that somewhere during this talk. Uh, I've had the privilege of speaking all over the place and valley and all over the United States, different places. And I was telling one of my guys today, we have a workshop on Saturday morning, and I was telling my guys today that I'm really not a good circuit speaker anymore. I can't. And he said, "Well, why do you think that?" And I said, because I just did an hour and a 10-minute talk up in Wisconsin, and I only mentioned alcohol like for 3 minutes. Really, I only talked about alcohol for 3 minutes, and the rest of the time I talked about alcoholism and God. I only talked about the symptom for 3 minutes. And the rest of the time I talked about the disease that centers in your mind, not your body, and what the Lord has done for me in my life. And because I don't know, I love drunkalogs. I grew up on drunkalogs. I love the Clancys and the Johnny Harrises, and the Bob Earls and all the guys. And I think they're fantastic, especially for new people, for identification. I think it's important. But I think what I've seen in my life, one of the things that being sober for a while causes you to have is you have a little bit of a perspective. My sponsor used to say, when a man with experience meets a man with when a man with money meets a man with experience, the man with the experience will walk away with the money, and the man with the money will have walked away with the experience. And the way we got a new perspective is by repeated humiliations and the final crushing of our self-sufficiency. And the only thing I can tell you about being around for almost 42 years now is that I've been repeatedly humiliated for 41 years. So when you've been repeatedly humiliated as many times as I have, you sort of look at things with a different perspective. So maybe for the first 10 or maybe even 15 years, I was a member of the not drinking club. There's two doors, I think, in AA, and these are all my opinions, by the way. I hate to alienate or hurt anybody's feelings or disturb anybody in an AA meeting because of something I said. No use getting upset about something I said. I'll probably change my mind right after the meeting, but I figure out, what can I say? If I don't mean to disturb anybody, it's just something that happens whenever I talk. It's I'm a product of AA. What can I say? So I just say stuff. But the bottom line is that in this, if anything disturbs you, just remember the spiritual axiom. There's probably something wrong with you. There's probably something wrong with me too. So these are all opinions. I'm going to voice opinions. What I've noticed in Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't know whether you guys have noticed it if you've been around for a while, is that we have a lot of people in AA up to 20 years. And then between 20 years, and this is all general, between 20 years and 40 years, in 40 years sobriety, there's this like giant canyon. I call it the 6-step canyon, where people in the not drinking club go to die. And there's a lot of people in AA if you and they've done, actually, I was talking to somebody up in Wisconsin about this deal, counting chips. The statistic I heard was only 0.5% make 20 years. 1 in 200 makes 20 years. You know, AA has been around for almost 100 years now, 90 years. You'd think if you go to a meeting, there'd be like 40 or 50 guys with 40 years and 30 years and 45 years. And there's like, you're lucky if you got one guy, you know. And I went to a group and there were like 300 people in the group, and there was like 2 guys that had 40 years and 3 or 4 people that had 30 years, over 30 years, and then the rest, nobody around. But you know, you hear a lot of, do you guys hear a lot of things wherever you are where people say, I had 5 years and then I drank, and I had 11 years and then I drank, and I had 19 years and then I drank, I had 22 years and then I drank. You ever hear anybody say, you know, I've been around AA for 35 years. I came in 1972, but I'm coming up on 1 year now. You ever hear anything like that in AA? And apparently you can come into AA. There's a great, I have an email I send out, and on the email there's this essay called A Strong Cup of Tea, written in 1950. And one of the things this guy found is that there's 3 ways of doing the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You can, number one, not do it at all. Number 2, you can do it sort of, well, he called it AA light. And number 3, I won't go into number 3, but you can do it the way they did it between 1935 and 1945, which is a whole different story. You don't find that around too much anymore. But in any event, he said, apparently you can stay sober for a long period of time, just doing it a sort of like a light go over. You know what I mean? You know, not worrying about this, utterly abandoning yourself to God, and half measures avail us nothing, and there is no middle of the road solution, and God is everything or he's nothing. You know, in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, a book that I highly recommend and I love and I talk about all the time. When Dr. Bob went to sponsor or 12-step Clarence the Brewmaster, and Clarence was only 35 years old. He was 135 pounds. He was in the hospital bed. And this is, I'm not talking out of school. This is, quote, conference approved material, although I don't know anybody in the conference. You know, I'm not a big guy with conferences and committees and stuff like that. But the bottom line is that when he went in to see Clarence, the first thing he said, he looked at him, he says, what do you think about, this is Dr. Bob, what do you think about this young fella? And Clarence said, looked at him, and then Bob Smith said, you know, I don't think you're ready. You seem awfully young at 35. And Clarence says, I don't know how much more ready I could be. I was 135 pounds. I had no job. My wife was leaving me. I thought my life was over. I don't know how much more ready I could be. And then the next thing Bob said to him was, you like this? You're going to like this. The next thing he said to me, he says, do you believe in God, young fella? I guess there was nobody in the room to say, you're killing newcomers. You're scaring away the newcomer. You can't talk about God to the newcomer. He said, do you believe in God, young fella? And Clarence said, you can look this up, check me out. Clarence said, what does that have to do with it? And Bob Smith said, everything. Everything. And he says, well, I guess I do. Bob Smith said, guess nothing. You either believe in God or you don't believe in God. And he says, I do. He says, good. Now we're getting somewhere. Get down on your knees. We're going to pray. I don't know how to pray. I guess you don't. But just follow me and we'll do it. And then the next thing he says that he said about Dr. Bob, he says, there were no suggestions. I did what I was ordered to do. When Dr. Bob was asked anything like, what's this first things first thing, which Dr. Bob coined, Dr. Bob would say, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. Of course, that's the book where between 1935 and 1940, before the big book was written, where they said these words. The books that the old timers found absolutely essential, which is like essential to the power of 10, were 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, in the book of James, and we were almost called the James Club. And then they wrote this book that said, rarely have I seen a person fail who has thoroughly, whatever that word means, follow our path. Well, I don't think a lot of people are reading James or 1 Corinthians 13 or Sermon on the Mount, or the first meeting. Did you guys know the first meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous was Dr. Bill, and he put his foot on on a stool and he read Sermon on the Mount. That was the first meeting in AA. Yeah, well, whatever. Forget that. I apologize. Don't report me. I'm just old and kind of crazy. But so here, I was thinking before I got on, I see some oldsters on here. Do you guys remember the September song? I'm not gonna sing it to you, although I think I can, and I love it. But Frank Sinatra does a great deal on it. And let me just give you one of the verses of the September song. You ready? It says, and it says this. It says, it's a long, long while from May to December, and the days grow short when you reach September. The autumn weather turns the leaves to flame, and I haven't got time for the waiting game. And I haven't got time for the waiting game. Oh, the days dwindle down to a precious few, September, November, and these few precious days I'll spend with you. These precious days I'll spend with you. So I'm 73 years old, and I'm an alcoholic, and I have no bucket list. None. Zero. No bucket list. There's absolutely nothing I need in my life to make things better. They're incredible the way they are right now. There's two groups in AA. There's the not drinking club, don't drink even if your ass falls off, and don't drink and go to meetings, put the plug in the drug. You can screw up your entire day no matter what you do. If you haven't had a drink, you're a winner. There's the don't drink. There's a birthday. You got 4 years. You got 15 years, whatever the heck it is. And there's this other group. They talk about it in the big book. It's called the group that's being rocketed in the fourth dimension of existence, experiencing much of heaven and knowing peace. And it says the great fact is this for that group, that they've made God, their creator, the central fact of their lives. And they are utterly convinced that he lives in their hearts and minds in a way which is indeed miraculous. And the sixth step talks about that group, by the way. The sixth step says that group is the group that's become entirely ready to do anything and remove anything that separates them from God's will and who God is. And it says that group is composed of people that are repeatedly trying to grow in the image and likeness of their creator. And they have an actual image and likeness of who their God is and what they're looking for. And it says that's the group where there's a separation between the men and the boys, or the girls and the women. So you're gonna have to excuse me. I know I get a little crazy on this stuff, but you see, I just don't have time for the waiting game. When you're 30 and 40 years old, maybe even 50, you can think about getting laid or having fun or going to a party. You can wake up every morning and say, if I only had more money, if I only had a different job, or if I only had a different wife, or if only they treated me differently, if I only did this, if I only had that, if I only lost 50 pounds, bigger breasts, new blouse, new car, I don't care. If only I had this, I'd be okay. Oh, by the way, if you're saying that to yourself, if you find yourself ever saying, if I only had this, I'll be okay, what you're actually telling yourself every day is, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. I'm just not okay without these things. That's the life I lived. I lived the life of I'm not okay unless I have these things. But what happens is somewhere along the line, at least for me, I don't know whether it's 70 years old or 80 years old or 60 years old. That's not a fun thing to live. That's not a fun life to live. Do you know that you can have 20 years and not be happy with your sobriety? I know that because in the big book, it says here and there, once in a while, a former drinker says, feel better, look better, having a better time. We laugh at such sallies. Soon he'll try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. Soon he'll know loneliness as few do. So listen, so these few days I'm going to spend, I love spending time in Alcoholics. Let me tell you something. I go to 4 meetings. I was going to 4 meetings a day in AA before Zoom. 3 or 4. I mean, I go to a 7 o'clock meeting in the morning before I started thinking. You understand? I go to a 12 o'clock noon meeting, you know what I mean, and have lunch there. Then I go to a 5:30 meeting on the way home because I always went to the bar on the way home. And then sometimes at night I meet my sponsor and I go to like an 8:30 meeting. I was going to 4 meetings before Zoom. You know, now it's absolutely crazy. I go to like a 7 a.m. meeting and called the Serenity group, and I go to a 12 o'clock noon meeting. Mondays and Fridays, I go to Men on Track, and Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays, I go to Men Fully Alive, which is a bunch of old guys and young guys and everything. And it's a wonderful AA meeting and wonderful group. It's just scripture friendly, you know. So we talk about the big book and the Bible and stuff like that. So we're into that stuff. And then I go to a 4 o'clock meeting every day. And then at night, I do stuff like this. And I do go to live meetings too. I do step series of live meetings. I love being with alcoholics. I am so grateful to God for allowing me to have this life at this time in my life where not only I can do service, I can't even call it service. I'm like an ambassador in chains. I can't call it service. How can you call trying to love other people and lift up other people and encourage other people and try to give away what you've been so freely given by God's grace? How can you call that service or even work when you have so much joy in doing that? I mean, how can you? I mean, I'd be a fraud. You know, Bill Wilson said, the Lord in Alcoholics Anonymous #3, because I want you to be able to check on this, because I don't want to, before you report me to New York, tell him there's some old timer here who's killing newcomers because he's talking about God and stuff, you know, and maybe they'll rip that stuff out of the book. As long as it's in the book, I'm going to talk about it. So in Alcoholics Anonymous #3, Bill Dotson, you know, that's the man on the bed, came to believe. You know, in Alcoholics Anonymous #3, Bill Dotson says, I knew that he was sober. He said, I knew there was something I was missing. There was something wrong, something I'm missing, something a person ought to have, a release, a happiness, something I knew a person ought to have and I didn't have. And one day I was in my kitchen with my wife, Henrietta, and we were eating lunch with Bill Wilson. And Bill Wilson turned to my wife and said, Henrietta, the Lord has been so wonderful to me, curing me of this terrible disease that I have to keep talking about it and telling other people. And all of a sudden, a light went up on my mind, and I said, that's the secret. Bill Wilson was very, very grateful for his sobriety, and he gave all credit to God. And he was so excited about that, he couldn't help. He was compelled to talk about it. That's how you know you've utterly abandoned yourself to God. That's how you know you've gone over the top and they better institutionalize you. When you start talking, when you stop the stuff of worrying about what some guy who's sitting next to you in an A meeting who's not even paying your Visa bill, when you stop worrying about what he's thinking about you, and you talk, and you can't help but talk freely about God at an A meeting. And you can do that, by the way, because, you know, the people that are emotionally sober, at 23 years sobriety, Bill Wilson wrote when he was going down the tubes at 23 years, that 23-year mark, Bill Wilson was going down the tubes. He was going to drink or kill himself. He was going nuts. He wrote an essay on emotional sobriety. He had an epiphany. He figured it out. He hit that 23-year mark. He hit that big canyon, and he finally figured it out. And he wrote an essay. He said, the real problem with alcoholics is unhealthy dependencies, depending on other things other than God. And what Bill Wilson discovered, and you should read this thing, is he says, you can't depend on anything other than God. You have to completely abandon yourself to God. God is either everything or nothing. By the way, A takes the position he's everything. You understand what everything? And Bill Wilson realized that his problem was that he had invested a lot of dependency on Alcoholics Anonymous. Now that may seem, now that's not so bad. It's not so bad when you come in and, you know, God's your sponsor, or God's your AA group, or God's your, you know, the AA as a whole, or God is the fellowship. But let me tell you something, the one who has all power in the universe, there is one who has all power. I got some bad news for you. It ain't AA. It ain't even the trustees of AA. You know, it just ain't. It ain't AA. It ain't the group. You know, it ain't the tree. You know, because whoever it is, it's, by the way, God's pretty much described in the book. He's pretty much described. But I can tell you one thing about him: he has all power. He has all power. I can tell you that. And I'll tell you what else it says. It says one of the things it told me is it said that I had selfishness, that the basis of my problem is I'm selfish and self-centered, driven by 100 forms. Anybody hear this? Do they have this in Tennessee? I'm selfish and self-centered, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion. You know, I'm delusional. That means my alcoholic life and my alcoholic thinking seems normal. I can't separate the true from the false, even though I know I'm brilliant and smarter than anybody. Our alcoholic's life seems the only normal one. We can't separate the true from the false. You know, it says, we're selfish and self-centered. We're delusional. We step on the toes of others and they retaliate seemingly without provocation, but we've learned we've done things in the past, which puts us in the position. We've made decisions in the past, selfish decisions in the past, which is hard for me to do because I'm not a selfish guy. I'm a good guy. How do you know whether you made selfish decision when you don't even know what your selfishness looks like? I mean, I guess you spend the first 10 or 15 years making amends and doing 10 steps, kind of getting a picture as to how selfish you are. So it says, that's what it says. It says we've made self-decision, which puts us in a position to be heard. So alcoholics are self-will-run right, though they usually don't think so. And I asked my sponsor, because it didn't sound so bad. Selfishness, self-centered, that's the basis of our problem, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking. We step on the toes of others, they retaliate, seemingly without provocation. They've made decisions in the past, a selfish decision, put them in a position to be heard. So alcoholics self-will-run right, though he usually doesn't think so. It sounds pretty cool. You can memorize it, doesn't sound so bad. I read it just like I read everything else in AA, quickly. You know, I read it. Have you read the big book? Yeah, I read it. I asked my sponsor, what does that mean? What does that mean? And he said, Russell, let me explain to you what it means. It means you don't give a shit about anybody except yourself. And I said, I like the way they say it in the big book better. I don't like the way you put it. You see, when you actually read these things and listen and think about them and tear them apart, they may have a much deeper meaning as to who you are and what you are. And they may have a different picture as to your acute illness of alcoholism and what the real problem is. So in any event, well, I guess I should tell some stories. I could tell a lot of drunk logs. There's nothing like that. Well, listen, just a few things. Oh, the bucket of crabs. I do want to mention the bucket of crabs because I'm going to mention it some later on in a few minutes or something like that. So if you go crabbing, looking for crabs, okay, and you get a crab and you throw it in a bucket, you understand what I'm saying? The crab will try to crawl out of the bucket. But there is a way of keeping that crab in the bucket. And the way you keep that crab in the bucket is you throw in another crab. Because if there's two crabs in the bucket and one crab tries to crawl out, the other crab will grab onto it and pull that crab back in. Now, that may seem like a nonsensical story, but it has everything to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. It has everything to do with why some people, only a very, very few people get to 40 years and 30 years. And most people go away from this disease before they hit 20 years. I've often thought that if we had as many faithalogs as we had drunkalogs, we'd have less people with 11 years slipping, you know? But you're not allowed to talk about that stuff in AA because AA is a here's this cute thing. AA is a program where it says, above everything, we must get rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And it only seems he can make that. And then it says later on, after a couple of paragraphs, it says, if you stay close to God, if you take this matter seriously and you sincerely turn your life over to God and stay close to him and perform his works well, he'll give you everything you need. You know, it actually says that in the big book. It says that stuff, you know. And so I'm in Wells. One time I complained about Alcoholics Anonymous, our wonderful fellowship, which I love. I love. But something happened. Somebody said something or did something, and I turned to my sponsor complaining about AA, and he says, you know, Russ, you must have thought you joined Well People's Anonymous. So this is not Well People's Anonymous. I do the program just like you guys do the program. I do everything I'm supposed to do in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, except the stuff I don't want to do. You know, here's the deal. The big book says, the 12 of 12 says, unless and until an alcoholic accepts his alcoholism and all its consequences, his sobriety will be precarious, and if true happiness will find none at all. Unless and until an alcoholic accepts his alcoholism and all its consequences, his sobriety will be precarious, and if true happiness, he'll find none at all. A lot of people don't make it past 20 years because they have what's called precarious sobriety. They are spiritual agnostics, spiritual atheists. In the big book in chapter 7, where they talk about humility and humbling yourself, they say you can have an honest and earnest religious belief and believe in God, and your belief remains barren. This isn't me. This isn't my opinion. This is what it says in the 7. Barren, because he's not the centerpiece of your life. He's not really the central fact of your life. But that's the interesting thing about AA. We have this program where God runs all through the book, all through the steps. The entire thing is about giving your life to God. I've just said a few quotes. I could say 100 quotes, every other page about God this, God that. See to what your relationship with him is right, and great events will pass for you, countless others. And we live in a fellowship where people sit in their chairs and they're scared to talk about God because they know it's unacceptable. And they know some old timer, a guy with 10 years or 15 years, will come up to him and say, you talk too much about God. Alcoholics are one of the consequences of being an alcoholic is you're very prone to peer pressure. You know, if you're an alcoholic, you're a please love me aholic, please let me blend in aholic, please don't talk behind my back aholic, please say nice things about me aholic. You know, if you're an alcoholic, you tell yourself things like, you ever say this? You know what alcoholics say? By the way, this is not the symptom, the drinking. This is the actual disease. You say things like, I don't give a crap what they think about. I don't give a crap what anybody thinks about me. You ever tell yourself that? You ever tell other? You ever say to anybody else, you don't give a crap what everybody? You ever tell yourself that? You ever tell yourself that more than once, that you don't give yourself crap? You know, you listen. You know what I learned? People that really don't give a crap what other people think about them never say, I don't give a crap what other people think. They never even think that stuff. They say things like pass the ketchup, but they don't say that shit. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you what. And you got a whole group of Alcoholics Anonymous where their only hope is in God. And everyone has figured out the picture that the one thing you're never supposed to talk about in AA is God's grace in your life and the wonderful and the glory of being rocked in the fourth. And that's the one. Everybody knows that you can say anything, but don't talk too much about God because somebody's going to beat the crap out of you. Some old timer's going to tell you you're murdering newcomers. You're murdering newcomers because you talk about God. Somebody should have told Dr. Bob that and Bill Wilson that. And of course, Bill Wilson was worried about that. And in Dr. Bob, the Good Old Timers, he went up to Henrietta Sarbel and he said, I don't think we should talk too much about God. And Henrietta said to him, she said, Bill, the only reason you're sober is God. And if you can't talk about God and you can't express what he's done for you, if you can't do that, you might as well be the Kiwanis Club or something like that, because that's where the power is. And finally, Bill agreed. But Bill had that little problem. He was worried about what other people thought about. And we all have that problem. You know, but I'll tell you this, if you're worried about talking about God and naming and expressing what God's done for you, well, maybe he hasn't done that much. You know, maybe he hasn't done that much. I'll tell you one thing I learned, and I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, but if you're worried about talking about God in an AA meeting, don't ever believe you're ever going to get to the point where you lose that fear of other people. You know that promise? We lose fear of other people. You know that promise? By the way, in the big book, you don't have to worry about apologizing for talking about God. I never apologize for talking about God because I have a big book where it tells me that the guys that wrote it said we never apologize for talking about God. We never apologize for our faith. All men of faith have courage. Courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. It says that twice. Instead, we let him demonstrate in our lives what he has done for us. We let him demonstrate what he's done for us. That's the golden text. Bill Wilson, the Lord has been so wonderful to me. And it says once we do that, we begin to outgrow fear. At once we begin to outgrow fear. How about that? How would you like that? What would it be like if you were not afraid of talking about God in an AA meeting? Man, that would be something, wouldn't it? What would it be like if you didn't sit around worrying about what other people thought about you? What kind of life would that be? Almost like being rocketed in the fourth dimension. Man, I'll tell you, what a bondage to worry about what a bondage to try to be somebody who other people like. Try to conform yourself to other people's expectations. I think that has something to do with alcoholism, So my wife said to me, my first wife, I looked at her one day and I said, man, if I could only have, I'd say this a lot. If I could only have that gal, I'd be okay. If I could only have that gal, I'd be okay. If I could only marry that gal, I'd be okay. And I put on a full court press to marry that gal. I insinuated myself into that gal's life. You know what I mean? I was like 21 years old. I was 20 years old, something like that. And I insinuated myself in that gal's life. And her father was a doctor and her mother was a lawyer. And her grandfather was a lawyer. And I was studying, I was going for my doctorate in algebraic topology. And I was going to be a math and physics professor in college. And I graduated with the departmental honors in mathematics. And that's what my deal was, to get my PhD and do that stuff. And I met this gal and I wanted to marry her, and her family was all professionals. And all of a sudden I started thinking to myself, maybe I should be a doctor. Maybe I should be a lawyer. And I applied to medical school, but I didn't have biology. So they said, you go back for a year and get biology. You got great grades. We'll take you in. And I didn't want to wait a year. I ain't waiting no years. So I went to the law school. They took me right away, and I'm a lawyer today. And people would ask me why you're a lawyer. And I would say, well, because I like Perry Mason, whatever it is. And why I became a lawyer? To get into some gal's pants. Now, that may seem unusual to you. I didn't realize that at the time. But when you're a man of low integrity, you'd be surprised what you would do. Let me tell you something. I wanted what she had, and I was willing to go to any length to get it. If it meant becoming a lawyer to get into that family, and I became a lawyer. And 5 years later, after having a baby and being a division chief in the state's attorney's office, trying major crimes cases and murder cases, and I had a house on Miami Beach on the golf course, and I had the whole thing working for me. And every night I'd roll in at 2:00 in the morning while my wife was there with a baby, and I'd be drinking with the homicide cops and everything like that, and all that deal. And I never physically cheated on my wife. Never physically cheated on my wife. I'm really proud of myself for that. I would just sit there at 12:00 at night and stare at the blondes, brunettes, and redheads. Said, man, if I only wasn't married. If I only wasn't married, I could go out with that redhead. If I only wasn't married. But I never physically cheated on her. I just get home every night at 11, 12, 1:00, miss dinner. And one day she came up to me and she said to me, it's like she was delivering the mail. She said, Russell, I want you to know, if you come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. 12 words. If you come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. I was like 27 years old, 26, 27. I was as sober physically when she told that to me at 7:00 in the morning as I am right now. I was a lot smarter because, now I have that senility thing going on, and I don't think that fast anymore. So I was smart. I was a division chief. I was a lawyer. I was sober physically. And she said, if you come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. Everything that was important to me was right up there on the line, or should have been important to me. And I got in my car and I drove 3 blocks and I stopped at a light and I said this to myself. I thought this: what the hell did she mean by that? I was baffled. What did that mean? What did she mean by that? You see, one of the things I learned, one of the consequences of being an alcoholic, this is a consequence of being an alcoholic, is whenever you hear, read, or are told something that you don't agree with or you don't like, it confuses you. It confuses you. 12 words. If you come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you. I was trying to figure out what the hell could she mean by that? By the way, what she meant was, if you come home drunk one more time, I'm leaving you, because I came home drunk that night and she kicked me out of the house. That's a whole other story. So I guess that's my drunk story. That's one drunk story. I've got a bunch. I got, you want the selfishness? How about a selfishness story? I'm going out with a gal. I'm in love with her for a year. Every day I'm thinking about her. I'm in alky love. I can't stop thinking about her. I can't think about the sex and about her and everything. I'm like 18 years old. I'm like head over heels. This is the woman I love. She came down from New Jersey one day in December. She says to me, my parents, who haven't seen me in a year, who's financing me, they'd like me to come home for Christmas. For Christmas. I look at her and I say this. Well, what about me? What about me? And she says, but my parents, they haven't said, well, what about me? What am I going to do? And I knew she had a boyfriend up there and she was probably going to have sex with him. I knew all about that stuff. We had a major fight and she flew up to New Jersey to be with her parents on Christmas. And I'm sitting there feeling sorry for myself and drinking from the cup of self-pity and drinking and all that stuff. So I come up with an idea, a brainstorm. And I had one credit card I hadn't maxed out because I don't know about you, but I spent money I didn't have to buy things I didn't need to impress people I didn't like. And I had this one card that I hadn't maxed out and I bought a plane ticket. And my idea was on Christmas, I'd show up at her house and surprise her. And so on Christmas morning, I showed up at her house and there I was. I rang the doorbell. I said, here, it's me. It's me, a surprise on your Christmas to help you celebrate Christmas. To ruin your Christmas, you know? Well, I thought it was love. The cops said it was stalking, but I mean, what do they know? You know what I mean? It's oh, Dan, yeah, you're laughing like you don't know what it's like. But the bottom line is this. You know what that is? That's alcoholic selfishness. That's my entire life. My whole life was making decisions like that. Every decision I made was, what about me? What is this going to do for me? How will it look for me? Me. You know something? I'd love to say alcohol turned me into an idiot. I would love to blame everything on alcohol. Let me tell you something. I've hurt many of the same people, many of the same ways after I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, let me tell you something. I don't know about you, but I have a disease and it ain't the symptom anymore. You know, I mean, I'm not saying, look, I could be drunk in an hour. You know, I absolutely believe that I believe I'm powerless over alcohol. My life is unmanned. I believe I can be drunk in an hour. You know, I don't want to drink. I don't feel like drinking, but I believe that. I'll tell you one thing. I know that I've recovered from that hopeless state of mind to body. I know what a hopeless state of mind to body is. That's when you wake in the morning and you seriously say, I'm not going to have a drink, and then you're drunk by 5. That's when you do that every single morning and you can't stop drinking. That's a hopeless state of mind to body. I don't suffer. I've recovered. By God's grace, there's nobody in this room that has any idea why they're not drinking. There's nobody in AA that has any idea. If they tell you they know why they're drinking, they're lying. They have no idea why. One day they couldn't stop drinking. The next day, that's God's grace. You know something? I do know why I'm not drinking. It's God's grace, and I'm satisfied with that. And so I keep myself in that deal because I don't want to drink again. But the bottom line is that I've recovered from that. But I'll tell you what I got to worry about. I got to worry about the thing that centers in my mind, not my body. That's why I buy stuff that I don't need to impress people I don't like. That's why I said nay means worried about what people think about me if I talk about God. But the good news is that somehow, some way, God has lifted that fear of other people and fear of economic insecurity from me. I'm not saying I'm absolutely, totally perfect. I'm not sure we get that way, but it gets pretty damn good. It can get pretty damn good. And so this is what I talk about in AA meetings. This is why I'm not really a good speaker anymore. This is why I'm not a good convention speaker anymore. Because I don't want to talk about the drinking. I drank alcohol because no woman, no car, no amount of money, no nothing ever worked quite as well and quite as fast as just a few drinks. And if it worked for me the way it worked for me when I was 18 years old, I'd probably still drink it. But alcohol stopped working for me, so I don't drink it. And the sad news for me is it stopped working for me about 10 years before I realized it stopped working for me. And I hurt a lot of people, you know? So let me see. I got time for like 2 more stories. So let's, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I walked in the door. I'm skipping a bunch of parts. So I've had 4 wonderful sponsors and a mentor, Bob Sullivan, Joe Snyder, John Glenn, God bless him. God bless John Glenn. I got him when I was about 17 years sober. John took me to that next level. You know what I mean? The rocket ship ride. I'd sit down at a Denny's to start eating. He'd say, "What are you doing?" He says, I'm eating. He says, "We can't eat. We got to give thanks to God." And he would bow his head. He was a Baptist preacher and, missionary. And he was like 75 years old. He had 55 years sobriety. And he'd do one of these prayers in the middle of Denny's. And I've got my head down. It'll be a long prayer, long prayer. And I'm looking around to see who's looking at me, and that kind of crap. And then he'd stop and he'd look up and he'd say, "Now, Russ, the food will taste better because it's got that special ingredient. It's got the special ingredient." You know why I'm so excited to be here? Because my life has that special ingredient. You have this thing over there where you turn things over. You ever hear in the old days, they used to say, "Well, just turn it over, turn it over, turn it over." And I spent the whole life learning how to turn things over. I'd worry about it for a week and then I'd turn it over. And then one day when I was about 25 or 26 years sober, after about 10 or 15 years of Bible study, which I'm still going to, joining a church because apparently, I know it's optional, but apparently in the book it says we encourage church membership. Most of us belong in that. So I decided to take them up on the extra credit stuff. Why not? The extra credit stuff. I decided to lift up off the bucket of crabs and do the extra credit stuff, because to get the things that most people never get in AA, you got to do the things that most people will never do. So I decided to do the extra credit stuff and go to Bible study and AA. I added it on. I didn't leave one for the other and all that sort of stuff. And one day I woke up at 25 years sober, and I realized I hadn't been worried about anything for months. And all I did when I woke up is I was just thinking about God and thinking about the big book and scripture and other people and how grateful I was. And I realized that I didn't have to turn anything over because I was living a turned over life. So why would I talk about, and then I drank, and then I drank, and then I drank, when I can talk about the blessings of doing this thing the right way? And so if you're thinking to yourself, "Wow, this guy, I've never heard anybody talk like this in AA. They're not talking about this stuff in my meetings that I go to." If you're ever saying things like this, you need to ask yourself, why? Why aren't they talking about this stuff? Maybe not for the newcomer, although quite frankly, I have a lot of newcomers that they don't come up to and say, "You're killing me." They come up to me and says, "Can I hang out with you? How can I get this thing? Where should I read the book?" They get excited with this stuff because they want weight and depth. But you want to know something? You know who I worry about? I'm a guy who has a heart for guys with 11, 12, 15, 20 years, 25 years who are not happy with their sobriety. They don't even know they're not happy with their sobriety. Final story. Well, it's 8:54, but I can get this in. Final story. Actually, I have 2 final stories, but I can't get them both in. So I go to see my first sponsor, Bob Sullivan, and I'm in my office. He's in my office with me, and there was a cosmic mistake. I graduated from, I was brilliant and I had all these degrees and doctorates, and he never even graduated elementary school or something. And he was a used car salesman, and he had about 15, 20 years sobriety, and he's sitting in my office and I point to my diplomas. I have literally about 20 diplomas and degrees on my wall attesting that I've been educated far beyond my capacity to understand anything. And I said, Bob, these are my degrees. And Bob looks at me and says, you know, Russ, rectal thermometers have degrees. You know what they do with those? So that's pretty much how I was sponsored for my entire life. That's exactly how they sponsored me in my life. And 10 years later, well, I'm already late. Forget it. It's 8:55. That's all you get. I'm done. It's over for me. Forget it. Adios, muchacho.